You're listening to Creativity Unconfined. Stay tuned to learn about how the arts unlock the doors for those who are imprisoned.
Greetings. My name is, as always, Dave Gussek, and I remain director for the Florida State University Institute for the Arts and Art Therapy with the Imprisoned. And we have yet another episode of Creativity Unconfined. This is a dynamic episode. I can't wait to bring these two people out. To me, this is the power couple of arts and corrections. And you'll know what I mean, not only when you hear the bios, but when you get a chance to meet them as well. To start with, I'm going to talk about my friend and colleague, Amanda Gardner. Dr. Gardner is the co-author and co-editor of Arts and Criminal Justice and Corrections, International Perspectives on Methods, Journeys, and Challenges, which came out 2 years ago in Routledge, and an officer with the nonprofit organization SCAN Correctional Arts. She is also the co-author and curator of the Prison Arts Resource Project, an annotated bibliography of all evidence-based studies in the field of arts and corrections in the United States. And this is an amazingly important project. I can't wait till we kind of dig into that. The project was funded by the U.S. National Endowment for the Arts Research Grant, and she's also a community arts practitioner, having facilitated creative writing workshops in a homeless shelter, prison, jail, and community art space for low-income artists. She has been the recipient or co-recipient of four National Endowment for the Arts grants. She has a doctorate in interdisciplinary studies and wrote her dissertation on homeless writers, largely inspired by 9 years facilitating workshops at a homeless shelter. Her husband, Grady Hillman, first engaged with prison arts when he accepted a Writers in the Schools NEA residency with the Wyndham School System of the Texas Department of Corrections in 1981. From 81 to 84, Grady taught creative writing for GED students, ranging from illiterate to GED prep at 16 Texas prisons. He uses community service hours to conduct weekly professional writing workshops at 3 of these prisons. That beginning led to correctional arts on-site relationships in 30 states and 5 foreign countries. Grady has co-founded SCAN Correctional Arts in 1984 and currently serves as president. Hillman has an MA in anthropology, University of Texas, and conducted a Fulbright Fellowship in Peru, researching Spanish and Quechua narratives from 89 to 90. His books and monographs include Razorwire, which poetry was the Austin Book Award in 1986, Return of the Inca with the Quechua translations, Artists in the Community, Training Artists in Alternative Settings, and Arts Programs for Juvenile Offenders in Detention and Corrections, A Guide to Promising Practice 2002. In 2023, Routledge published, here it is, Arts and Corrections, 30 Years of Annotated Publications, a selection of articles, books, chapters, monographs, poetry, interviews, published from 1981 to 2014. Believe it or not, after all that, we still have enough time to bring out this power couple and get a chance to speak with them about all of the work they've done. But before I bring them out, I just want to underscore that I have known about them for many years with my own experience in arts and corrections in California. And to me, to have them on the show is just so incredibly special. So without further ado, Grady and Mandy, hello.
Hello.
So there's so much to unpack here. Now, I also want to underscore that I do get the unmitigated pleasure of serving on the executive editorial committee for the International Journal for Creativity Inside with Mandy Gardner. Mandy is providing invaluable service. You would think just by saying that she's a copy editor, it sounds like she has one singular job. Mandy has been instrumental in making sure that these issues are getting off the ground. So between the two of them, they have established in concrete, 40, 50 years worth of arts and corrections. How did we get here?
Should we leave? Exit right.
Yeah.
That's what I said. So, how with your very varied backgrounds, how did you find yourself working within the correctional arena, seeing the value and benefits of arts inside?
Who starts first?
I don't know. Should we go rock, paper, scissors? Okay, Mandy, you start.
Okay. I actually I didn't start in community arts in a correctional setting. I started at with homeless people at a homeless shelter in New Jersey, which was a complete accident. And it's not hyperbole to say it pretty much saved my life. And then I did that for 9 years. It was very hard to leave, but I left New Jersey and came to Albuquerque.
Wait. You can't just gloss over that and expect us to just, when you say it's not hyperbole to say it saved your life, how did that save your life?
I was a very shy person. I had moved around a lot as a kid and never really felt like I had my footing as a person. And when I walked into this space, I felt like, and this is the mystery of community arts, is very hard to articulate, but I really became myself. And in a way, still, when I do the community arts, I feel like my ego recedes a bit, and I'm one with a community of people. And I think it's interesting because there is this duality in the arts and corrections field where, there are the hearts, like, oh, it feels right, it's my calling, whatever. And on the other side, we want the numbers, right? So it's interesting because I started very much in that feeling space. And Ella Simpson, who's a researcher and professor in the UK, wrote a wonderful dissertation on what the motivations were for community arts practitioners, and she was focusing on creative writing practitioners in the UK. And the main thing was actually not any kind of, benevolence or patriarchal, but mutual aid. Her conclusion was that it was really mutual aid that motivated people in the free world, so to speak, to go inside. I had this complete aha moment. It wasn't helping anyone else. It was just about being together. And I wrote my dissertation on homeless writers, or lack thereof. And I think so many people used to ask me, well, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this workshop at the shelter? Are you hoping to kind of find the next Hemingway, or are they going to find a house out of, or a dwelling? And I grappled with that question a lot. And I really think ultimately I did it because it was an hour or more of redemption for all of us in this world. And I really felt that these are very, very vulnerable people who aren't necessarily seen that way, who trusted me with their writing, with their thoughts. And this was just, I think, one of the biggest honors of my life, still is.
Oh my goodness. And then you did that in New Jersey, and then you found your way to Albuquerque, you were saying.
Yeah, I basically ran away.
Escaped. Let's call it what it is.
Yeah, I had a broken heart and a portable job, so I just left. But I found Grady, and I tried to find a similar gig with the homeless population or unhoused population, and I didn't have any luck. And I'd always been curious about the other side of the fence, so to speak, because there is such a revolving. And so New Mexico and Albuquerque being what it is, I called the program director at the jail, and he said, sure, come on down. And that was that. So
just like that.
Yeah, pretty much.
and while that was happening, Grady had already been established doing the work in arts and corrections for a long time. And again, I do want to stress that, well before I met either of you, and I'll explain a little bit how I got a chance to meet Mandy. I've known the name Grady Hillman for many years because of my own work in California prisons and some of the things you've done. How did you find your way into prisons, given your wide, varied background?
I was not arrested, so
not convicted.
I was in, voluntary confinement. No, I was. I should say, Mandy's long introduction was that she essentially was raised abroad, Indonesia, Turkey. And so she never lived in the States coming in, except for 2 years in Virginia or something like that. And so she came straight from Indonesia to Smith's College, and so she had always, as a State Department brat, she had never had a home.
I felt at home there. That's a very, very tricky thing to talk about, though, because I've never been socioeconomically homeless. So I am very nervous about kind of portraying it that way, because I haven't had, homeless is very, very hard to define, but I think on some level, regardless of where we live or don't live, there is a point of intersection that we can reach, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there is that sense of not feeling grounded either.
Right.
Oh, very much. Yeah.
And that was part of our connection, because she's an expat State Department brat and I'm an oil field brat. I moved every year, all over the States, mostly in the South, but also I was in Venezuela for a couple of years. And so then after that, I just felt much more comfortable in South America almost than here in the States. But so how I got into this was, I was a poet and started doing poetry performances and such, and had done a lot of translations. I had a lot of English, Spanish, a little bit of French in New Orleans, and I got 3 years of German in high school. And so I lived in libraries, and I lived, with the word. It was always about the word. So I was a poet in Austin. They recruited me to a Poet in the Schools gig. My first gig was in Mumford, Texas, with 3 classes, kindergarten through 8th grade, and I was doing Poets in the Schools. And then I began to do that in a lot of places: Huntsville, Beaumont, Houston, and such. And I was in Huntsville, where the prison system is, and there was a guy at the Art Commission who said, why don't you do Poets in the Schools in the prison system? And so, and I thought about it, because I really never thought about doing that before, but it worked out. I didn't know if it was even possible, because it was a geographical school district for the whole state, 26 prisons, and every student had to be treated in terms of reading, writing levels and such. And so there was a school in every prison. And at that time, correctional ed was a big deal. It was very bibliotherapeutic. If you couldn't read or write at a 5th grade level, you had to go to school, and you had to do work, because it was agricultural prisons, mostly, and all of that. So I was brought in to be poets in the school, and I would go to different prisons and work with the illiterate, yes, which, I had a stroke. This, Dave, but I had a stroke 15 years ago, so I have a little bit of aphasia, so I find my words.
It also gives me job security as a wife.
Yeah. But the deal is, I went to all of these different prisons, and then I had 3 creative writing workshops at 3 different prisons, and at night I would go over there once a week, each prison, and these were guys. They were all guys at that time. I did a lot of work with the women's prisons itself, but I didn't have another a specific class, creative writing class for them. But these guys, a lot of them had degrees. They were very good writers, and it was very interesting why they wrote, where they came to writing and such. And I learned a lot about the whole history of prison writing. I did a screenplay on the prison years of O. Henry. I just, it's very interesting how writers have always grown up in prison. That's what you do. So
Yeah.
there's not much else to do.
So, I think Mandy can attest to this, maybe you can attest to this as well. Over these many years that I've been doing this work, I've found unless you go in and help kind of alter things or provide freedom to express more openly, there is certainly a particular style that remains consistent within correctional institutions, particularly visual art. Phyllis Kornfeld wrote the book Cell Block Visions. We have a lot of very similar looking imagery until we go in and help kind of give them permission, so to speak, to kind of express themselves the way they want to, not the way people think they need to be. Do you find that in writing as well, there is a similar voice or similar style that you may see?
There are a lot of, when I was started in the Texas prison system, I did an anthology of creative writing through the whole system. And there were, Good Old Boy. And then you got the whole system of Hispanic writing. I spoke Spanish, and so there were a lot of writing about family and such. And the art, you had panos art, where you take, handkerchiefs and then you would make it might have religious images, but then tattoos as well. Tattoos were a huge phenomenon. The one thing that came up more when I started working in juvenile facilities is that a lot of programs in jails were started by guards who saw all of the art that was done on the envelopes, and they would say, "These are amazing." I don't want to send this to the guy. I want to hang on to that. It's beautiful stuff. It was at that time in the early '80s. It was the small press revolution. Everybody was producing, and there were lots of broadsides. And I went then I did go to California,
Right.
and I worked in a dozen prisons there,
Yeah.
87, 89, 91, with Bill Cleveland, always
Yes.
bring me back. So
My goodness. I had actually started in the prisons right around the time that you had left. But we all knew about that. We knew about your work. And of course, I knew Bill Cleveland well. I mean, I knew of his work very well. So I'm fascinated by that. And then of course, while you're doing this and you're developing this, then Mandy comes along. Tell me about that dynamic intersection. I mean, there's this exchange of ideas and perspectives. Yeah, Mandy, you kind of shifted to focus on working with those inside based on those dynamics. But what is it that you learned from each other as you went through this process?
Well, you knew who Grady was before you met him, and so did I. I had his poster on my wall, actually. No,
That's a little frightening. It's a little frightening.
I had
what poster?
It was underneath the Jim Morrison poster. It's fine.
No, I actually had a book about poetry therapy in which Grady had a chapter.
Okay.
So that was partly, well, I don't know how flippant I can get here, but I want to say
as flippant as you need.
Okay, I want to say I was Grady's worst nightmare, because he's very focused on,
Good.
The facilitator is part of a program, and it's whatever training and this and that, and I was kind of like, well, here I am in Albuquerque, and I need to do this. So I call him up, and I just was flying by the seat. I mean, I had no idea what I was doing at the homeless shelter. This guy at the homeless shelter, I wanted to be a writer more than I was a writer. And and the nun who finally said, okay, you can do it, said, this will never last. I mean, I had no experience. I had nothing. And, it just became this thing. And so from Grady, I mean, I've learned a huge amount about many of the things that he talks about as such assets of art programs, meaning discipline, and that kind of thing. And I think I've assimilated it both for myself, but also in terms of my teaching. But he has this remarkable repository of information about poetry and how poetry works and what, and I'm constantly kind of drawing on that. And, so it's always kind of exciting to be constantly learning all of this, because I don't really have, I was a government major, so I don't have that.
Wow.
Well, when I met her, we met personally at a conference in Albuquerque. I was brought in, and it was me and Margaret Randall, and then Mandy was the put it together and such.
Okay.
And then
this feels like an episode from When Harry Met Sally. This feels like one of those.
Well, it was in a way, because you've been here, so
Yeah.
I was over. She put me up in her house. Now I slept with a dog, but I was perfect.
Oh, fair enough.
On the deck, 97,000 feet.
7,000.
7,000. Right. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that 97 would scare me.
And no, I was like, and it was right there by Tinkertown, and it was just great. And so then we connected, and later we became romantically involved, and then we.
Did Mandy know that?
Oh, well, supposedly,
Well, that's why
she told me.
But that's why I listen so carefully to these conversations, so I can learn this kind of thing.
But it was but basically, and also I should say, she knew a lot about creative writing. She was doing Flash, and she'd done lots of publications in small press, magazines and such. And certainly I was not that knowledgeable about Flash, so that was her.
He's talking about very short form
vignettes,
chapbooks, and right.
Well, I mean, Grady is a poet, and I just have to say that he used to work on the rigs, when he was in college and in between. And he said that he realized he was a poet one night on the rigs he was writing, and he was like, "Oh no, I'm a poet."
You got to face the inevitable.
It's one of those things when you wake up and you got to go, I got to write this down, and write down, and you're really sleepy, and you're looking in the web. What the hell am I? I'm a poet. What do I do about that?
A minute of all that nerve. So now you're finding yourselves working in these environments where it's very difficult to get in these spaces. It's very difficult to kind of negotiate the space between the us versus them mentality. You're offering so many unique things. How is that accepted? How is that responded to, both by the correctional staff and by those that are incarcerated?
Well, I should say, I started in 81, and so I worked in about 200 correctional facilities, mostly, in Mississippi. I had, there were, I should say, I started in adult corrections. But then I shifted over with the crack phenomenon with juvenile because you couldn't get into prisons easily anymore. I still would go to various different prisons, but I had my lab was Corsicana Juvenile Correctional Facility for the emotionally disturbed. It was about and it was co-ed, and and I worked there every year for, I think I said it was 17 years. I would go in the summers and would spend for a couple of weeks. Um, these you just develop a lot of relationships,
Yeah.
and also at that time that became a big deal for me. That's the way I made my living. I think um, Susan Hill at that conference, I saw you at the Philly conference,
Yeah.
said that I was the uh, Johnny Appleseed of correctional arts
I think
because
so.
I really never had an organization, and I just sort of went by reputation. And I did a lot of publications, and people would, you know, bring me in to juice up their programs and stuff like that, or start new programs and such. So, and I had some. Uh, so it became, it wasn't as you know, I had an entree, you know, to the prison. So normally I was asked to come in and somebody's already broken the ice, you know, and so I would do what they wanted me to do, you know. So, and I worked with I had a Fulbright in Peru. I worked at a women's prison in Lima, and that was supposed to be my Fulbright. I was supposed to go to Bolivia, where I would be working in the campo at a prison, near a prison, and I was going to be studying narratives between families and prisoners. And because South American prisons, you pretty much, if you want to eat, your family comes in and has feed, you know, provide food for you and stuff like that. And so, but I didn't get that Fulbright. That was Bolivia, but I was the alternate for Peru. And so I had to create a new program for myself in Peru, but I'd studied Quechua. And so,
Amazing.
so I was doing a lot of work in the city, and had worked with a really good program in Chorrillos, Cedro, which was, it was a women's prison. And it was very, what I guess why most of the time, whenever I go into a prison, and I worked in London with Clean Break. I did a lot of work in the UK, Northern Ireland, and such. I did a lot of work. I had good relationships with James Thompson and Tim Chapman, who is and such. So it's kind of, I was the mentor for James Thompson. He came to Austin to do a Harkness grant, and so I would take him to go out to the prisons and such. And he came with his wife and the two kids and such, and we had a blast, you know.
I get I'm just interjecting because you said before you were often invited in, but it seems to me that the relation, not that I'm taking your job or anything, Dave, but the relationships that you developed and the way you navigated prisons really eased the way for others, you know.
I think that's one of the things I want to underscore with this program is that you guys both paved the way for a lot of people to come behind. And I think, Mandy and I have talked about this before. There are some people that think that the arts and corrections as a field is fairly new, and yet it's been around for, first of all, you've all began this back in the 50s and 60s, 50 years ago, not 50s, 60s, 50 years ago. But to say the arts have been involved and been around in prisons for decades, centuries.
Centuries, millennia. Yeah.
Yeah. So Mandy, you're finding yourself, you're working with those that are displaced and those that are houseless, and you're coming here to New Mexico. You're finding yourself working in these environments. How were you received, and how did you in turn find yourself? You said that you had some dynamics that you were working through in terms of your own shyness as well. Here you're being thrown in the middle of an environment that you really can't be that way. How did you find yourself doing this work?
It was a total accident, and I don't think I even knew that I had the capacity to not be shy and withdrawn until I walked in, and I wasn't. I mean, it's
Okay.
very weird. There's a, I mean, I am interested in witches and whatnot, and people talk about magic, and it's like, well, what is magic? And I was listening to someone talk about, some pagan religions and things that some may consider out there and magic. And then you think about sometimes people gaining confidence from a practice of some kind.
Yeah.
I mean, and I don't exactly know where that comes from, but that in a way is magic. And I think also that the arts can confer this life-changing. And so I honestly, I don't know. I walked in there and I was like, who am I? Like what?
Yeah. And
She's a natural.
well, absolutely. and to not put too fine a point on it, you start from that beginning, which sounds somewhat humble, or the way you're describing it, because that's how you are, Mandy.
Mm-hmm.
But then look where you are now, and you're establishing a huge dent in this world of arts and corrections. You wrote that book, which I'm pleased and honored to say that's how you and I started interacting at first, because I actually have a chapter in that book. Grady does not, but I do. I just want to reinforce.
I did
that
give her the dedication.
I gave him the dedication.
Yeah, okay. Whatever. I'm glad you guys gave it through him that bone. That's great. But here you are writing this influential book. Then John Whitman reads that book. You're brought into the International Journal for Creativity Inside. You're writing this. You're creating this clearinghouse, this database of all of these publications. You've written these books. I mean, how do you go from that to really finding this space for yourself to say, this is where I belong, and I'm going to influence all these other people that are coming behind me?
Well, I don't know about any of that. I just know
Take my word for it.
Pardon?
Take my word for it.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, sometimes I think about, because I get a little frazzled sometimes. I'm doing this, I'm doing that, whatever. I don't always manage my energy very well. And sometimes I think, well, what would be like the one thing, the one thing that I couldn't live without, other than Grady, of course. And that would be the hands-on work, it would, I mean, the other stuff, I mean, the way the book came about was I was trying to learn. I mean, I kind of found myself to be the curator of this, all these evidence-based studies. And I was like, well, what is this field and where did it come from? So I started interviewing people, and I interviewed Larry Brewster, who's the demigod of arts and corrections research. And that turned into an article. And then it turned into a book, which was largely based on the same thing. And the reason we had alternating chapters, where you wrote a chapter about methodology, and then I interviewed you and I wrote a kind of profile of you. And that's exactly, I was trying to learn about both the more academic research, scholarly side of correctional arts, along with the human side. In this case, the human side being people like you who do research and practice, or even Larry Brewster mostly has just done research,
It's great that you're saying that, because I think that's the impetus for this podcast and for things that we're doing, to find the human behind the name, behind the work that's being done. And I think, that first meeting was the first time I had ever met Larry Brewster. And everybody, for those of you out there who are listening to this driving down I-95, you may know that Larry Brewster was the person who wrote the very first article that indicated that those who engaged in the arts and corrections benefited greatly in terms of disciplinary reports, in terms of recidivism. And he wrote the first empirical study that was then replicated again in 2013. I mean, he's the beacon.
1983, and he's still at it.
Yeah.
Well, yes, exactly. And for him to realize that he's also interconnected with all of us, and we're interconnected with him, and you're the one who helped, you and Laura Caulfield, your co-editor or co-author, brought all these people together from all walks of life. I think that's a very selfless act, to be able to put yourself out there as the voice for all these other voices.
No, I just think I started this as a poet in the schools, and then I was in the prisons, and then I got invited to go different places, and so I was a grunt. I mean, I just did programs, workshops in prisons and stuff. Then do an anthology here and there, and then you go to other places and you suddenly know stuff, and that we do it different here than over there. So you begin to do, you're a trainer. You're used as a trainer how to make these connections and such. And then ultimately, you also become an advocate, because then you're doing a lot of, community work. Why are we doing this? When I was doing all of the juvenile programs and such, I would do a lot of Rotary Club kind of events and stuff like that. And you're always trying to share, all of that information to others. And the one thing that I didn't want to do was, because I did a lot of writing as well, I didn't want to do evaluation. I would do research for myself in terms of screenplays or poetry or stuff like that, or my historic work in South America and such. But I let that to the evaluators and the researchers. I don't do it all, so it's kind of like, we're all a tribe, and we all have our own skills and our ways of doing things. And that is what makes us, what we enjoy is to connect with each other. And
I don't know if this illuminates it at all. My father was a diplomat. He was in the first class of Foreign Service officers that weren't required to have attended an Ivy League school. He went to the University of Texas, raised by a single mother. And so I was raised in this kind of rarefied world where I was just not at all comfortable, and always kind of feeling not quite right. They had a lot of parties, and there was a lot of, you need to act a certain way. And, I was told I was a representative of the US government, and therefore I couldn't act that way, which of course today is kind of, sometimes hilarious. So anyway, I'm just saying it's irrelevant. That's nothing you can document or quantitate or anything.
I think it's completely relevant. I think we have to recognize that when we go inside a correctional environment, it's a whole new subculture, and we're ambassadors going in there, trying to learn their spaces and their rules, and learning how to be present there. And that's what you've done.
And my dad, he actually was an ambassador, which was kind of cool, because he was never kind of politically connected, but he always approached all these other countries really as an anthropologist, very like, I'm a visitor, I want to know you. He was really wonderful that way. And I guess, and Grady's an anthropologist too, but a little bit of a, I don't kind of walk into a situation and, I realize I'm the newcomer, and I know what it's like to be the new,
Yeah. So we have time for one more question. First of all, this has been so much fun, but there's this question I may take a few moments to kind of respond to. You've seen a lot. You both have been part of this for many years. I've been part of this for 35 years. So that gives you a sense of where I think the timeline is. that would be longer than that. What have you seen as things evolve? Where do you see things now, and where you started from? Tell me about your response to that evolution.
All of this suddenly became a very punitive system at that. I moved towards the youth, but suddenly the youth were being treated like adults. They used to be. So I was with, kids who are 13, 14, who are suddenly you see this this process of certification of youths into adults, and so that creates a whole nother phenomenon of prisons and such. Right now, I think I see this process going. Well, certainly, I've written a lot about the privatization of
Right.
prisons, and that has become anathema to me.
Sure.
Is just to see any education, anything that became easier and easier. You can go into a prison a lot more if you have your own grant and you have some money, then you can go in there and you do whatever you want, so it's with a private prison and such. Before I had the stroke, they were doing a lot more of migrant, prisons. There was a great program in San Antonio, Gemini Inc., that I worked with, and they were working with kids who were in these migrant,
Yeah.
facilities. And then pandemic happened. I was working with the NEA up until 2019, working with 6 prisons, federal prisons and such. And it became just a lot more difficult. And then post-pandemic, it's about us as a community. I'm still having a hard time as a community of correctional artists and such, still figuring out where we are and what's going on.
It's almost like we're starting over again.
Yeah.
This has been a remarkable conversation. I had so much fun visiting with you two again. Mandy, do you have a final thought? No?
What he said.
Oh my goodness!
Send me a video of that.
Yes, because you're gonna play it on loop over and over and over again. We'll make it into a talking point. Maybe that's the tagline we're going to use for the episode. This has been so much fun, and I always have so much fun being able to sit down with both of you. And I'm looking forward to coming back out there again and doing it.
I was going to say we're waiting.
I'll do it soon. Thank you both so much for
Thank you, Dave. It's so much fun to see you. So
it's wonderful.
Always, yeah.
Creativity Unconfined has been brought to you by Florida State University's Institute for Arts and Art Therapy with the Imprisoned. Special thanks to our producers Sydney Nichols and Malia Burrows, as well as Florida State University's College of Fine Arts. If you like what you heard, and even if you didn't, please support us by liking and subscribing.